Welcome to Behind the Book. It's time now for Behind the Book, hosted by Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion, two authors with a passion for books, no filters, and limitless curiosity. Join them now to find out the real story behind your favorite books and authors. And now, Behind the Book.
Welcome to another episode of Behind the Book. I'm here with Karen today, and we are going to do a fun bonus special. I don't know if that's what we're calling them, but we thought it would be fun to tackle some craft subjects as we go forward this year. And someone wrote in and asked if we'd talk about characters. So we were like, yes, we will. And as a matter of fact, both of us have done a presentation on this very subject. So we thought that was fun. So anyway, hello, Karen.
Hello, Tess. I actually am really thrilled about this because this is one of my favorite topics when it comes to writing. And I think that with newer authors in particular, it's a challenge. They've got the story in their head, they know how it goes, but how do you connect with the characters? How do you create the characters that readers feel emotionally connected to?
Yeah, and I think it can be a challenge, but once you sort of think of it more from a craft perspective of, okay, this is the problem and here are some ways to solve that problem, it becomes less of a, I guess, challenge, to think, lack of a better word. But so we're hoping to give some tips in that area. I think both of us, our strengths are in the characters for sure. We have that in common, even though, our books are not exactly similar. But I think this is a good one for us to kind of go through. And I have my presentation that I did in a local RWA conference a couple years ago. So I was just going to kind of chat through that. And then I know you also have a list, and we can kind of just go back and forth and share what we know.
In fact, for those who are listening, you should know that Tess sent me the PowerPoint presentation that she actually used at the RWA workshop. And so I got to see all the graphics and everything else. I was very impressed. If I had been attending, I actually would have picked up some tips back in the day. I had to learn the hard way.
Yeah, we can definitely share that PowerPoint presentation too in the show notes if anybody wanted to go through. And I was telling Karen before we started recording that I didn't realize until the day before I was supposed to present that I would not have access to Video clips, yeah. And I'd put all of these video clips in from, well-known television shows and movies as examples of, what I was talking about. So that day before, I had to scramble and get a bunch of examples from novels and go down to Kinko's and print them all off and everything. But I believe that the video clips might still be able to be accessed from the PowerPoint itself. So we'll see. I'm not sure about that. But anyway, we'll talk through the examples, and it won't be necessary to look at the clips. So to get us started, I approached it in kind of the presentation, just a storyteller way of comparing it to the ultimate blind date, and that idea that you have to impress your blind date partner right away, meaning you have to pull them in and impress them with how wonderful you are before the first drink comes.
And is that something we should be striving for, to impress, or just to make an impression?
I think to connect emotionally right away. I guess that would be sort of the same with a date, a blind date. You're like, sort of show them why you're special or why you would have a possible connection with them, that sort of thing. My presentation was specifically on how to create lovable characters, or characters that the readers fall in love with. So mine was sort of geared in that direction, but I know you have some thoughts about characters just in general. It doesn't have to be like a likable thing, but so you can add those in as we go along if that works. So I'm like, make them fall in love right away and keep them hooked and leave them wanting more. So in that first chapter, do what you need to do to get them to ask you for a second date, or go to chapter 2.
And I think it's important that you said in that first chapter, you have to have a very strong sense of who these people are.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. And why are you going to be invested with them for another 8 hours of your life, and why you care. So, so I have this little, and I just sort of made it up, but I call it a superpower. And I like to think of each character that I write, especially a hero or heroine, having one, and not necessarily like being able to fly, but something special or unique about them. Katniss is a good example. She is a great hunter, and that's established immediately that that's something that she can do that others in her community can't, and that they rely upon her for. And that pays off later in the story when that basically saves her life because she uses these skills. I also use Katniss to give an example of self-sacrifice. That's something that I think really pulls people in and makes them on your character's side if they see them doing something for other people. So, for example, Katniss taking her sister's place, and that comes almost, I think it's even in the first chapter, she's established two things. One, that she's a super hunter, and two, that she would do anything to save her sister, including giving her own life.
Yeah, and I think that's something just people in general like to think that when it came down to it, we would do the right thing, that we would,
Yes.
be that person that would step forward. So when we see it in a character, we connect with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't remember who said it, but something like, your hero or heroine, they're just like you, only better. So, it's like they're you, the awesome you. And in a fictional world, they do have to be a little bit larger than life, even when you have a realistic story, because nobody wants to read about kind of an ordinary, mundane life. We already have those of our own. So in fiction, it has to be something special. And then I also have this thing I do, and I actually got it from a talk at a conference I went to with Anne Perry, who's like a amazing mystery novelist, very well acclaimed, and she went through this whole list one time of all the things that you should do before you send your book off to the editor. One of the things she said that really struck me was, what would your character be willing to give up for love or for something that they want? And that always frames it for me. It's like, what is it that would make them willing to change their life or take on the fight, or, the hero's journey, the reluctant hero or whatever. So that's something I kind of think of before I start a story of, like, what does this person care about the most? And then a lot of the decisions throughout the story, I can go back to that and say, what would they do? Because this is what they want.
This is something you map out before you even start writing?
I pretty much know, like, okay, here's the wound. This character has, something has happened to them in the past that defined their entire life. So it can be their father left when they were 5. And how does that event frame the rest of their world and their life and all of the actions that they've taken since? And for romance in particular, and I think I've said this on here before, I like the idea of a hero and heroine having this wound that the other can help heal because of their experience, because of, what they've gone through. But it's also a trigger for them. My father abandoned me when I was 5, and the hero has been married once before, or the hero has a reputation of being, a ladies' man, or, whatever. That's kind of a dumb example, but that sort of juxtaposition, and that, of course, isn't really anything to do with likable characters, but that's just something, that's a way I think about it, because if you think a character starts at base 0 and then changes through the course of the story, you have to have that beginning, middle, and end to where they started from and where they end up.
That is fascinating, because I feel like I've been doing it wrong all along. Sometimes I'll be working at the beginning of a novel, in the beginning stages, and I'll say to my husband, Greg, I have no idea what this guy's deal is, but he's got a big chip on his shoulder or whatever. And I sense that he's got something in his background that makes him that way. And it almost feels like it reveals itself as I go along. And then I have to go back and layer in things earlier. So it sounds to me like you sort of have that in mind and build from there.
Yeah, not every time. There have been many times where I've done what you've had to do, where I'm, kind of writing along and all of a sudden I go, oh, I know what this is. I know what this guy's deal
Okay.
is. And yeah, and that
Yes.
informs everything. And then I have to go back and rewrite. So I love it when I know it beforehand, but it
Hmm.
doesn't always happen. Although I have found, and I think this comes with writing series, because I sort of have maybe if let's say it's a 3 or 5 book series or whatever, I've got those characters pretty much figured out. So a lot of times I'll have figured out their deal in book one, even though their book isn't really till book three. So that's kind of, I think, one of the things that happens that's maybe different than if you write standalones. All right, so in my presentation, I have something called the Elle Woods effect. I made this up.
Oh, Legally
But you
Blonde.
yeah,
Yes.
League of Blonde. Everybody knows that movie. And that's to take a stereotype or an archetype and mess with it. So she's the perfect example of, this society rich girl dressed in pink, perfect little blonde who everybody thinks is dumb or, dismisses her.
Dismissed as an airhead. Yeah.
It just is an airhead, yeah. And then she does this amazing thing. And the reason that she does it is for love. She follows this guy, to law school. Then she just kills it when she's there. She's like super smart. She's better at it than everybody else. And so that's again a superpower. And I don't remember the specifics right now with the movie, but it's established in the beginning some of these special qualities that she has that then show up later in helping to solve the crime and win the trial.
And I think that's an important attribute too, is that I've always found that the character, the main character or characters, should be the hero of their own story. So if someone
Yes.
else had helped her to get into Harvard Law School, the story would not have had the same impact or power to the reader.
Yeah, and also her, like going back to the character arc or journey, her journey realizes that it makes her realize she doesn't in fact want the man, but has found her true calling as a lawyer. So that's another like perfect example of something that's really interesting and that makes us all think, oh, what is it that I have? Like, were there times in my life where something similar happened? So it just, not only does it make you root for her, but you also are interested to see what's going to happen next. And the other thing about Elle Woods that I think is a great thing to think about for characters is that she does everything her way. She wears her pink pretty suits to class. She has her hair done every day. Like she doesn't change herself, yet she changes at the same time. I don't know if I'm explaining
But
that.
she found the inner
Well,
strength while still
yes.
maintaining the fashion sense and the outward facade, and she still carries her
Yeah.
little dog around, which is just really endearing,
Exactly.
and funny.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's another thing. I know in Save the Cat, he talks about the Save the Cat moment where if you're undecided about a character or you're not even sure you like them, if fairly soon into the story they do something nice for, he used the example of saving the cat, but for an animal or a small child, or I think when we were talking about this the other day, you talked about for the nice lady next door, the elderly lady, it really does influence how we perceive a character.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who aren't familiar with the Save the Cat concept, it's actually a craft book for screenwriters, but there's also one now for novelists. And the basic premise with the Save the Cat is that, yeah, they can be a terrible, they can be grumpy or bossy or
Or a
whatever, but
serial killer.
yeah. I mean, extreme case, but on their way home from work after a bad day, they see a cat up in the tree and they save it. And I use that almost always. I do something like I have a character who she she makes a pot of soup every Sunday for her elderly neighbor. And she looks after, and so I just established that right away. And that makes people go, oh, she's great. She's done this great thing. And then she's having some struggles in hopefully you setting up with a reader like, it's so unfair that she should be going through this when she's such a wonderful person.
Well, and I just want to add the book Save the Cat is by Blake Snyder, and we'll put the links in the show notes.
Yeah, for anybody who hasn't had an opportunity to check that out, you really should. And I just recently got the one for novelists, and it's really excellent as well.
I noticed in my many, many years of writing, and I've made mistakes, but one thing that I did notice is that readers seem to respond to characters who are in pain. And it doesn't have to be, that they had a major injury. It could be just that they're horribly lonely or that they, are burdened with family issues. They're the one everyone comes to and they have no time for themselves. Whatever it is, it seems like when a character is in pain, it flips the empathy switch in a reader. Then you want good things for them. That combined with the saving the cat is like, this is a good person. She or he deserves better. And you read along to see if things do improve for them.
Yeah, and I actually had this in the presentation. I used Kate Quinn's book, The Alice Network. In the first chapter, she has, it's told from multiple points of view, but the main heroine is this young woman in the late 40s, I believe, who is pregnant. And she calls the pregnancy her little problem because that's what her mother called it. Well, let's just go get your little problem taken care of. And she establishes right away, I have absolutely no intention of taking care of my little problem. Like, I'm not going to do what my mother wants me to do. And, that's, I always think of the plucky heroine, the odds are against them, but they're very brave and they're like, I'm going to do this. And then of course we want to know, okay, how are they going to get out of this problem or how are they going to solve it? So I think that's another good one. If anybody ever wanted to check out that book, that's a great examples of characters.
A character you can admire.
And also is complicated because she's from this wealthy family and she's been at college and she's very promiscuous, which is not necessarily an admirable quality.
Well, in that time period, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And we come to understand why she's that way. And it's very understandable. And then of course she meets somebody later that is her true love. And that's just one's plot. And it's a very complex book. I'm sure you've read it. It's a great one.
I have another one. I think that characters should have friends, which seems really obvious. But I wrote a book and it was a young adult novel. And it took place in the course of a week. And this teenage girl had an adventure. They were driving somewhere for a week and didn't make mention of her friends. She was with someone she had met relatively recently. And one of the reviews were like, I wasn't sure I liked her because she didn't have any friends. And I thought, well, of course she had friends. They just weren't with her that week. But I think at the very least, she should have been thinking about her friends or calling her friends or remembering something about her friends. So from that point forward, every time I wrote a novel, made sure that the characters had friends. Good friends.
Well, good friends. Yeah. And ones who are on their side. Elle Woods is another one that established the sorority sisters.
Oh, they loved her.
They helped her. Yeah. And they helped her figure out, okay, here, we're going to get you into Harvard or whatever. And that makes you know, oh, well, she must be great because she has all these friends who love her. And, she's obviously not a mean girl, even though she's in the sorority, that kind of thing.
Well, and I tend to think that you see trios, like the main character has two friends in a lot of fiction. I think of Harry Potter and Hermione and Ron, and Nancy Drew had two friends, and now I'm blanking out. But when I gave my presentation, I had like half a dozen examples. So for whatever reason, the rule of three, that works with the friends thing. Because even though she had a ton of sorority sisters, I think two of them showed up to the trial at the end. I could be wrong.
Yes,
I'd have to watch
they
that
did.
movie again.
Yes, and then
okay.
And then she made friends. The hairdresser, and everything, and she's very loyal. And it is a good friend to people, and that we like that about her too, definitely. Mm-hmm. So the other section in my presentation is once your reader is in love, you have to keep them in love. And I had a couple of examples of ways to do this. Have your character do something unexpected. The more out of character, the better. And that one almost seems counterintuitive. It's like, well, you've established these things about the character, but if they find themselves on this journey, they're going to have to adapt. And that's a great time to make them do something unexpected.
Oh, I have an example. I was in a writer's group a number of years ago, and one of the members, who's an excellent writer, wrote this short story. And it was about a guy who had agoraphobia, So he almost never went beyond his front porch. He was terrified. And he had to get to the bank to make a payment for a neighbor who was going to lose their house, I think. I think somehow he was the only one that could do it. And in the short story, you basically followed him with like every step out of the house and his panic and I can do this, I can do this. And he started to concentrate on the cracks in the sidewalk. Like if I just look down. And so I found that we were totally rooting for him. We sat around a table and this guy brought the story in and he read it out loud. And he stopped at a certain point and was like, well, I've taken up my share of the time. And we were like, no, keep going. So that's
We want to know
what you're
happened.
talking about. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that's out of character for him, obviously, because he can't leave his house. But and that goes back to the self-sacrificing. He's doing this for this other person, which makes us really drawn to him. I also sometimes have, or they have a secret, I guess a secret the reader doesn't know about yet, and have them reveal that. So that kind of goes back to, okay, so he kind of seems like a jerk at work. We're still with him because he saved the cat, but then we learn about his wound. His father left when he was 5 or whatever. And that explain. And actually this, in my recent book, I use this. I have a guy who, this is book 4 in a series, and he's been kind of a jerk. Well, actually he's been a huge jerk throughout the series. And he's now the hero of the 4th book. And this was one where I'd had it planned all along. Something happened to him when he was a war correspondent in Afghanistan that just wrecked him. And he's just racked with guilt and shame and everything. And that clouds all of his relationships, all of his, choices. And once that's revealed, then we're like, oh, okay, so he's not so bad. And when he reveals that to the heroine, who also has some things from her past that she can understand why he feels that way, well, that gives them this connection, not only between them and the reader, but each other.
I think we should also clarify that your father did not leave you when you were 5.
I know, as a matter of fact.
You keep bringing that up. It's starting to sound personal.
I know. Well, and he is, he would never have ever left us and is the exact opposite of that. So maybe that's why I can talk about that with such, just tossing it out there like it's nothing.
We had a good friend of yours, the actor Kristen Carey, on one of our episodes. And one of the things she said to get ready for portraying a character was to look in the script and see what other characters say about the character she's going to be playing. And you had told me that that's something that you learned in drama school as well. And I think that's a fun thing to do.
Yeah, well, and it kind of segues into the idea of what other people think of the hero or heroine. Yeah, in a play, it's harder to do because, you don't have the inner monologue. But with a novel, obviously, we can explain a lot of things to the reader. But yeah, how they treat their mother or how their mother thinks of them deepens the character and gives, we're not the same with our best friend as we are with our, daughter or, whatever. So yeah, looking at all the relationships and really exploring those, I think just gives it a deeper resonance.
Well, and you had mentioned the inner monologue, the inner thoughts of the character. And that could be a powerful way to let the reader know who this person is. If they're
Absolutely.
saying, no problem, I'd be happy to do it. But inside they're thinking, crap, now I won't be able to go.
I can't leave my house.
Or whatever. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So,
yeah.
That gives the reader great insights.
And we kind of touched on this before, but having them do something noble or self-sacrificing, even if it's small. So again, like making the neighbor the soup every Sunday. And then, of course, a huge one, again, would be Katniss, who basically gives up her life for her sister. And then, of course, giving them a lot of troubles and obstacles. And the more unfair, the better. Make them suffer. And I really struggle with this one because I do, of course,
too.
Love my characters. I'm like, I don't want them to have to go through that. But if you don't, then you don't really have a story.
Yeah, they have to have some sort of conflict. You have to build some tension. I think that there are genres, though, where likable characters aren't as important. I'm thinking of something like Gone Girl.
Absolutely.
I didn't really
Yeah.
care for either the husband or wife. They're fascinating, complex people. And I wanted to know, the twists and turns and everything. I was along for the ride, but they were not anyone I'd want to hang out with, even knowing what they were thinking and feeling. So I'm almost wondering if that's thrillers, you can get away with a little more of that.
Oh, definitely. And you also can get away with an unreliable narrator, which is what, Gone Girl has. We don't really know what the truth is, and the narrator is not telling us the truth, or the whole story. And that's an unusual choice. I think it's been kind of popular lately, the unreliable narrator, but for the most part, I don't particularly think readers respond well to them. That was an anomaly, I think.
You're
But
taking a chance, I think.
yes, huge. Yes, yes, yes. And even you're taking a chance, even with like My Hero was kind of a jerk. It's like, people are like, I don't want to read about this guy. So that's where you have to really, give them a surprise or a secret, and that helps. I use the example of Sybil from Downton Abbey as a character who could be one way, but chooses a harder path. For those who don't know the story, she's the youngest daughter of noble family in England, and she is very socially conscious and actually falls in love with the driver. She's really interested in making a difference in the world and everything, and that makes her really compelling because here she has everything. She could just go the easy route, but she's out there like working for the poor, and she's in politics and all this kind of thing.
What do you think about someone like Ebenezer Scrooge in A Christmas Carol? What makes us really want things to turn around for him?
Well, yeah, I think, and actually it's a great segue because the next part of my presentation was even with heroic characters, they should have flaws and handicaps. And he's like an extreme example. He's one that I would say you're not really on his side for quite a while because, the first couple scenes, he's so mean.
I think, though, what Dickens did that was really brilliant was we start to see who he was before he became such a jerk. We see the backstory where he was in love with this beautiful woman and he felt like he should value getting ahead in his career and making more money. And she just walked away and you think, oh, you made a big mistake. Big mistake. Yeah. And he was so kind to his sister when he was young. And you think, okay, he wasn't always like this.
Exactly. Well, that's that's kind of what we were talking about before is, you think somebody's something on the surface, but then their past is revealed and then we can understand, oh, this is why they are the way they are. We talked a little bit about this before, but your antagonists, who obviously aren't going to be lovable, but I like books where they're multidimensional as well. Like we understand why they're evil or why they're doing what they're doing, even though we don't want them to.
Yes, otherwise they come off like cartoon characters. So do you have a favorite villain or a favorite character in your books?
An example in one of mine is I have two brothers and a sister, and their mother abandoned them when they were small.
were they 5?
Yeah, one of them was, yeah. And so, of course, it's established in the earlier books, and that's part of their wound. They're all messed up from it. Well, then the mother shows up. And a big part of one of the books my Cliffside Bay books is their reconciliation with her and her explanation to them of what happened and why she had to leave. So, yeah, I think that's an example of one where I did something unexpected. You think, oh, this woman was just bad. She left her children, but well, why? And then is it possible for them to have a relationship, 20 years later? Actually, I had a reader send me a note recently that said it had inspired her to reach out to some family members that she'd been estranged from. And I was like, wow.
The power of words.
And the power of a story, yeah.
And that the characters really touched her and affected her.
Yes, which of course is what you want.
I have another one. I think that for beginning writers, and this seems really obvious, maybe to someone who's more skilled, but if you're just starting out, the reader should experience the world through the character and all their senses. not just sight and sound, but taste, smell, touch. So when they walk into the room, they don't just see things and, you talk about talking heads. There should be a reason for almost everything. A reason they pick up that pen and fiddle with it, a reason why they walk into the house without knocking. Those are all cues as to who the character is. You're like, oh, okay, they're good enough friends that he doesn't have to knock. Or maybe he's got a little nervous tick with twiddling the pencil or the pen. So think of ways that you can incorporate little habits and things like that will give the reader clues. So you don't have to say he's a nervous wreck or they've been friends for long enough that they feel comfortable coming and going. So that's something I try to do, or even like layer in later if I haven't done it during the first pass.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think you gain as you keep working on your craft is that kind of that point of view of, you can describe scenery, but is that something your character would notice? For example, Elle Woods would probably always notice what people were wearing. Another hero or heroine would notice the color of the walls or the smell of something cooking. So I think if you can always just sort of think of what has this character gone through, what have you established about them, and then how would that then make them see the world or be in the world?
I think that's a good note to end up on. Don't you, Tess?
All right, I do. All right, well, we hope this has been helpful. And if you have any questions or things that you're interested in us tackling, please do send us an email or a message. And we hope you enjoy the show.
Thank you for listening to Behind the Book, brought to you by authors Tess Thompson and Karen McQuestion. They hope you found it entertaining and informative. If you loved it, tell your friends. And if you have a moment, they'd love for you to post a star rating or review. This has been Behind the Book.